Have a question or need how-to advice? Just ask Meta AI. Whether you want to design a marathon training program or you're curious what planets are visible in tonight's sky, Meta AI has the answers. It can also summarize your class notes, visualize your ideas, and so much more. It's the most advanced AI at your fingertips. Expand your world with Meta AI. Now on Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook, and Messenger.
Welcome to True Crime Garage. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, thanks for listening. I'm your host, Nick, and with me, as always, is a man who saw the lights go out on Broadway. Here is the captain.
And in that moment, it wasn't good to be seen, and it wasn't good to see you. Thanks for listening. Thanks for telling a friend.
Today, we are still drinking some gravel donuts by the good folks over at Outer Belt Brewing. This is a solid IPA, a great New England IPA. It's a mild hazy, but not mild on flavor. It reminds me a little bit more of a Midwest IPA. Juicy with just the right amount of bitterness. Garage grade 4.5 bottle caps out of 5. And let's give some thanks and praise to our friends for helping us out this week. First up, a big shout out to Logan and Layla in Fort William.
And a big We Like Your Jib goes out to Sarah Coughlin from North Granby.
And here's a cheers to Minnow's Mama from Liston, Indiana. And last but certainly not least, we have Sharon Spiller from Richmond, Virginia. Everyone we mentioned, they went to our website, clicked on that pint glass. That put some beer in the fridge for us for this week. And for that, we say thank you.
Yeah, BWERUN, Beer Run. If you want to keep the lights on, you want to keep the show going, support us on Patreon or through Apple subscription. And Colonel, that's enough of the business.
All right, everybody, gather around, grab a chair, grab a beer. Let's talk some true crime. Police were tracking down these leads. They were following where the evidence was taking them. This information that they had gleaned from the sales reports of these knives had taken them to the doorstep of Jim Parker and his parents. And before even leaving the Parker residence, some of these other detectives, remember we said that there were 30 plus investigators working this case? They sent other investigators to the home of the Tullicks to interview best friend of Jim Parker, Robert Tullock. Remember, Jim told the police, I bought the two knives for me and my buddy.
Yeah.
One was going to be mine, one was going to be his. This is what we bought them for. They didn't work out well, so we sold them. During that sit down, the police aren't really trusting what Jim Parker is saying because he looks so nervous. In fact, one of the detectives telling Jim Parker, look, I've been doing this long enough. I can tell when somebody's lying to me, kind of planting that seed of not calling him a liar, not saying he's a liar, not especially in front of his parents, but planting that seed of, I kind of know you're not telling me the whole story here.
Right.
What we learn here, Captain, is that they did the right thing by sending other investigators to talk to Robert Tullock and his parents. You want to keep these two separate. But the reason for doing so in that moment was not because the detectives were suspicious that Jim Parker had killed the Zantops, not because they were suspicious that even his buddy Robert Tullock had killed the Zantops. They somewhat believed the story of selling these knives to somebody, or at least giving these knives to somebody else.
Right.
In that moment, investigators believed we're talking about 2 high school kids here. We think they know something that they're not willing to tell us. We think they know who they gave or sold the knives to. And if we can find that person or persons, that is very likely our killer. Now, the flip side of that coin is you have detectives at the home of Diane and Mike Tulloch. Robert, their son, is home at that time as well. So now we have a sit down going on at the Tulloch's home, very similar to what was taking place at the Parker residence.
But if you're law enforcement, you have to remember when you're at the Parker's house, what do you see? A green Subaru.
Yep.
Now you're talking to his buddy. You're at the Tulloch's house, and what do you find? A pair of hiking boots. Same size.
Same brand.
Same brand. And again, it's a unique brand. It's unique New York.
You know what they're not seeing at the Tulloch's house that they were seeing at the Parkers is a very nervous teenager. This Robert Tulloch was described as cool as a cucumber. Yes, they found size 11.5 hiking boots, same brand that they were looking for, and they asked the Tullochs, can we take these hiking boots with us for testing?
Yeah.
Father Mike says, look, those are my son's boots. Should I get an attorney here? What's my move here? And the detective was very cool as a cucumber as well. Tells the father, look, if you say the boots stay, they stay. If you tell me that I can take them, we're going to take them, we're going to test them, and we'll give them back to you. And so Father Mike tells his son, Robert, these are your boots. What do you say? Robert says, go ahead and take them. So they take the boots, and Robert also says, just like Jim Parker said, he was willing to go down to the sheriff's office and be fingerprinted. And so he's there at the sheriff's office. He sees his buddy Jim there as well. They don't talk while they're there at all, but they do see each other and recognize that each other is at the sheriff's office, both for the purpose of getting fingerprinted, and I'm sure probably some other questionings going on at this time. Now, police, the authorities, let both of these teenagers go after joining them at the sheriff's office for a bit. The cops let both Robert and Jim go home with their parents that day because really the reality of it at that time was, despite all of the signs pointing strongly at these two boys knowing something or being involved, it seemed like the police needed more to build their case or just didn't think that these kids were vicious killers. They're high schoolers. Their parents loved them. They seemed to be respectful and polite. We know the police were wrong, at least in that moment. The boys' parents, rightfully so, had forbidden the two of them to contact each other until this whole thing got sorted out. It appears that both parents thought that this was just some kind of misunderstanding, right? That the cops weren't being rude or being bad cops. That they had evidence that led them to their sons. Their sons are cooperating. They're cooperating.
Well, they seem like nice kids from a nice family, nice community, popular kids. It just seems very strange. And what is their connection to these professors? None.
There is none.
And then what is the connection to even the college? None.
To the town of Etna. They had never, as far as the parents were concerned, they had never been there. Their sons had never been there. One thing that we need to make sure that we don't miss here, and is of note, is that Robert Tulloch had a pretty bad cut on his leg. And that, of course, did not go unnoticed by the detectives.
If I'm a detective, I'm going, well, I'm looking into these two kids and I'm getting some yeses, but I'm getting some nos too.
Mm-hmm.
But I need to keep them on the radar. They're not supposed to have communication with each other, but that's not what happens.
Yeah, if you're detectives, you're thinking, I have their fingerprint information. I have the boot. And so now I'm going to take this, give it to the people that can make the comparisons, and wait to hear those results. But they do, yes, Captain's right. The two teenage sons contact each other even though the parents said that they were not to speak to one another. They do what every other teenager does. You just wait till mom and dad fall asleep and then do what you're told not to do. So they make some communication via phone call, and it appears that that is all they needed to ignite the two onto a get out of Dodge situation. We do have John Parker, Jim's father, who says that he was sleeping, but then he heard a vehicle start up, and he runs to the window. He sees Jim driving and pulling out of the driveway. This is a silver Audi that is owned by the Parker family. John Parker, the father, quickly calls the Tolleks, right, to say, hey, my son just took off in our car. I'm guessing he's probably going to your place to see your son. The phone keeps ringing and ringing and ringing. He tries a few different times. Nobody picks up.
If you're a little bit suspicious of your teenage son doing something very dumb and very heinous, I think your suspicions and your red flags, all the alarm bells are going off as your son is leaving the house that night.
Yeah. So John finds a note left by Jim, his son, that says, I just had to talk to Robert alone. I will be back in the morning. Don't call the cops.
Again, another red flag.
So Dad tries calling the Tolleks' house. Nobody answers. He hops in another vehicle and drives out to the Tolleks' home. And now, eventually, we have parents talking to parents face to face. John Parker tells the Tolleks about the note that Jim had left. The parents kind of agreed, like, okay, this makes some sense. Our kids aren't used to being talked or interviewed by detectives or police. They were just at the sheriff's office. Okay, this makes some sense here. They probably just wanted to talk, go somewhere and sort some stuff out, and maybe they would be back in the morning just like Jim's note indicated. They were not. They did not come back that morning.
Right.
John Parker calls the lead investigator, Chuck West. This is at 11 a.m., and he says, my son Jim is gone. So an APB went out for Robert Tollek and Jim Parker and that silver 1987 Audi 500 that they were driving with Vermont plate CDG 690. So officers from various agencies working the case gathered to draft search warrants, right? Because now these two teenagers are behaving very suspiciously and appear to be on the run. So you are not waiting for test results to come back at this point. Now you're getting search warrants. But all at the same time here, Captain, the lab reports do come back. Fingerprints on the knife sheaths matched Jim Parker. And of course, he admitted to owning the knives.
And he has no reason to be there.
No. The sheaths had been found in the room with the dead bodies of Mr. and Mrs. Zantop.
Right.
And now police had confirmation that the knives Jim and Robert had admitted to owning were, in fact, the murder weapons. Vermont State Police Trooper Jocelyn Stoll. She's out driving in her cruiser. She's rushing off to an unrelated emergency call when she comes across a car stuck in the snow on Bethel Mountain Road. So this is the Audi, the 1987 silver Audi was stuck on the side of the road after it appears it had skidded on a ice patch. There's two teenage boys dressed in black standing outside of the car. They agreed to provide license and registration, but something about them triggered Stoll's spidey senses. She's asking, where are you going? They say that they're going skiing. This is a state trooper. She's like, sure, you're going skiing. And the ski mountain there is a ski mountain in that area. It's in the opposite direction of where they were traveling. So that's a flag. Further, the boys are not dressed for skiing. And the vehicle, there is no skiing gear with them. Instead, what she sees is two large black backpacks bulging with something inside. These are in the vehicle. The boys were shifty and weird. Stoll ran their licenses, finds no records, But she also knew that there had been some burglaries in the area. So this is what she's suspicious of, that these teenagers might have been breaking into houses. But she was in a hurry. Remember, she's got that other emergency that she needs to respond to. So she quickly puts together a report and has to race off to this other scene. The last line of her report about this incident, finding the boys in the vehicle on the side of the road, reads, "My suspicions of criminal activity were significant." Now, we have these search warrants are in full effect right now. We got searchers tackling Robert's room. In Robert Tollick's room, we have Gary Lawrence, who noticed a cardboard Florida citrus box in the corner of his room, tucked in next to a bureau. Inside of this cardboard box, they find some notebooks and other stuff. Under the notebooks were 2 duct tape bundles that turned out to be a mitten and a sock. Inside that mitten that was wrapped in duct tape and that sock that was wrapped in duct tape, they find a foot-long SOG Seal 2000 knife in each. In Robert's haste to get out of Dodge, it appears he had completely forgot to pack the knives. At the murder scene, the murderers completely forgot to leave the scene with the sheaths. Here, these 2 kids appear to have taken off on the run, and by the time that Robert realizes that he forgot to bring the knives, they're already on the road. He and Jim are already on the road. So now the police are in possession of the suspected murder weapons. The boys' story was that they had sold these knives to some guy. Well, that's not true.
Parker and Tollick, they're young and dumb.
Mm-hmm. Other items seized from both homes were clothing, computers, notebooks, writings, and a book about Hitler. A search of the Parker's green Subaru yielded a floor mat that was taken for testing. It would come back with positive blood evidence and the blood belonging to Susanne Zantop.
So we have the fingerprint evidence. We have the boot print evidence.
Yep.
This is all matching our 2 kid suspects.
Mm-hmm.
And now we find the murder weapons in their possession.
Yes. Yeah. It's in the room of one of your suspects, bedroom of one of your suspects. And
now we have these 2 numbnuts. They're on the run from law enforcement.
So you're going to collect this evidence and you're going to charge both of these individuals with the slayings, even though that they are not in your custody. And that's going to have a domino effect of now we got a nationwide manhunt for these 2 teenagers. What we would learn is that Robert and Jim had driven south to Massachusetts and then they were heading west. They decided that they had to lose the vehicle because they knew that police would be looking for this vehicle. We say it all the time, don't we, Captain? Cops love vehicles. They're so much easier to find than people.
Yeah, they're bigger.
They parked the car in a lot at a busy Sturbridge Isle truck stop in Sturbridge, Massachusetts. So at this service station, they are talking to different truck drivers and whatnot, and they find a tow truck driver. His name's John Moran, who was he works part-time as a cop, but he also drives a tow truck, or reverse that. He probably drives the tow truck part-time and works full-time as a cop. He said that he thought the boys looked nervous and noticed that they had New Hampshire plates. When he saw an APB out for the 2 boys in that plate, this is 6 hours later when he sees the APB, though, after seeing the boys. He does call this into police. So now police are hot on the trail, right? They go out to the Sturbridge and they find the vehicle, the Audi that they had left behind. The boys are gone by this time. They had ended up being successful hitching a ride west. A trucker with the awesome name of Rowdy Tucker and his wife Nancy had picked up the boys, taking pity on them because it's snowing, it's cold outside, and these are kids, right? They're teenagers.
They thought they're trying to help these kids out, and luckily we have them on surveillance footage get into the truck.
The boys introduced themselves as Sam and Tyler. They said that they were headed to California to try to get fishing jobs. The Tuckers were so nice that they not only gave them a ride, but also bought them snacks and stuff at the truck stop before hitting the road. They ride together about 220 miles to get to Columbia, New Jersey. The Tuckers used a CB radio to find other truckers who might be able to transport Sam and Tyler further west. This is as far as we can take you. We're going to see if anybody else can help you out. So another trucker, his name is James Hicks, agrees. He says he's driving a truck full of M&Ms to Chicago. The snack, not multiples of the wrapper.
Not the wrapper.
Yeah.
Just to be clear.
Yeah.
Not the wrapper holding cans of moose stew.
That's right. What is awesome here, though.
Well, if you're going from New Jersey to Chicago, you're going probably 90 to I-70.
Mm-hmm.
Going to pass right through Ohio, right through Indiana.
Yeah, so while this is all going on, this is very cool because the police are hot on the trail of this Sam and Tyler, the fake names that they're using.
Horrible names.
New Hampshire Attorney General Philip McLaughlin issued a statement that the teens possibly using the names Sam and Tyler were hitching rides at truck stops on interstate highways, and everyone should be on the lookout. By the early morning of February 20th, the boys were in the Hicks truck, approaching the end of his route in Chicago, right? The M&M route, that golden M&M route that everybody knows about that runs from New Jersey to Chicago.
Yeah.
That's how the chocolate is made. Hicks got on his CB radio and said, hey, can anybody give a ride to two boys who want to go to California? He had mentioned that they had been picked up initially in New Jersey. So a male voice responds, sure, I can. They agree to meet at the Flying J Travel Plaza in Newcastle, Indiana. Hicks' truck pulled in at 3:45 a.m. and he drops off the boys. This next bit is from the book Judgment Ridge. The trucker on the other end of the CB radio at that time, turns out, not a trucker at all. He was Sergeant Bill Ward, a 22-year veteran of the Henry County, Indiana Sheriff's Department. So he's working the overnight shift. He is eating a meal with three fellow officers at the Flying J truck stop restaurant. They discussed the fugitives, right? They had heard the APB go out for these two teenagers.
Well, I believe he also saw it on the news. They're
talking about this when they're having their meal. And they actually talk about the idea that, well, if they're heading this way, if they're heading out west to California, that Indiana would be a logical place for them to travel through along their route to California. So a couple of hours later, when Sergeant Ward was in his patrol car, he hears the trucker Hicks CB call for someone to pick up two teenage hitchhikers. He told Hicks he'd meet them at the Flying J truck stop on I-70 in Newcastle, Indiana. He calls his buddies for reinforcement. So this guy pretends to be another trucker that's willing to drive these kids. When they pull up, the cops are face to face with Robert Tulloch and Jim Parker, and Robert Tulloch says to one of the officers, "You've got us." After your laundry is set to permanent press, it's time to give Golden Nugget Online Casino a spin. With hundreds of the most exciting games, Golden Nugget lets you live it up in your downtime on classic and exclusive slots only found on our online casino. So take a load off while you wait for your load of laundry and say hello to your golden era. New players can get $77 instantly in casino site credits. All you have to do is sign up with code GARAGE and deposit just $7 to get $77 in casino site credits. Make any moment golden. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Or in West Virginia, visit www.1800gambler.net. Please play responsibly. 21 plus. Physically present in Michigan, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia only. Void in Ontario. One per new customer max. Reward of $77 in site credits that expire in 168 hours. See site for reward playthrough requirements and terms at goldennuggetcasino.com/welcome.
Have a question or need how-to advice? Just ask Meta AI. Whether you want to design a marathon training program or you're curious what planets are visible in tonight's sky, Meta AI has the answers. It can also summarize your class notes, visualize your ideas, and so much more. It's the most advanced AI at your fingertips. Expand your world with Meta AI. Now on Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook, and Messenger.
All right, we are back, you silly monkeys. Cheers to the people in the back. Talk hands in the air.
Cheers to everyone. Power to the people. Here we go. We got our guys in custody now after their attempt to flee out west by hopping trucks and getting picked up by the police, thinking that they had a third connection in picking up another ride out in Indiana, but that was not to be. Turns out to be the police. And you have a lot of evidence, right? Thanks to the evidence, investigators pretty much by this point know the who, when, where, and how about this case. But the motive continued to elude everyone.
Yeah, because we don't have connections from the killers to the victims.
Yeah, and you now have detectives interrogating the parents individually for hours, trying to figure out what the connection was. And the focus of this questioning was the family's connection to the area of Hanover. What was the relationship with the Zantops? And what were Robert and Jim doing in that neck of the woods? And as the captain pointed out before in this story, is that neither of the parents had any idea of any connection whatsoever that their sons would have with the area, with the Zantops, frankly, with Hanover at all.
But law enforcement has something on their side now. We have two killers, meaning all you have to have is one of the killers break and to tell you all the details of the crime and why they committed the crime.
And the parents in both cases, Robert Tollick's parents and Jim Parker's parents, they seem to be unable to process the knowledge that their children were murderers. Like, even when the police are pointing out all this evidence that says, look, this all leads to your son and his friend, they have a difficult time wrapping their minds around this whole idea. And then on top of that, the townspeople seem to feel equally as shattered.
Again, these are popular kids. They're likable kids, got decent grades, had friends.
Got great grades. Were considered to be intelligent kids and
no criminal history.
Correct. Now, what we start to see here is two different paths by these individuals that were arrested together for committing the same crimes. So you have Jim, he's in jail. We have Robert Tollick, he's in jail, but he's getting into fights at the jail, and it's reported that he was picking on persons he deemed to be weaker prisoners. He was sneaking letters to his girlfriend at the time and obsessively reading Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. And he was also planning an escape. We know that he confided in a biker turned check fraudster who went by the nickname of Ranger. So Ranger is going to be transported. Ranger takes the opportunity to talk to police while he's being transported. So this is Deputy Chad Morris that is doing the transportation here. So he tells the deputy that Robert Tollick told me that this crime was random. In fact, he and his buddy Jim, initially they intended to kill the Zantop's neighbors. They went to that house, knocked on the door, nobody answered, so they just kicked the can down the road and went to the next house. He said that he was told by Robert that there was no connection to the Zantops. They did not know who they were. They had not seen them prior to that day. He said Robert told him that this was his first murder and that he had wanted to get, quote, a few under his belt to get some street cred. Finally, Ranger told the deputy that the only item that the kids actually stole was Half's wallet. So this is backed up. They know this. The police know this from having been at the crime scene.
Yeah, there wasn't much money in there.
$340 is what was found in Half's wallet. And from my understanding, they used that money to buy 2 shirts and a pair of rock climbing shoes. So these two very lovely, wonderful people that so many adored, that so many loved their company, parents, turns out their lives were worth 2 shirts and a pair of rock climbing shoes to these 2 teenagers. Anyway, the story was that Jim and Robert had gained access to the Zantop's home by pretending to conduct an environmental survey for a school project. They selected Etna, the area of Etna, simply because they thought people would be rich. The people that lived there would be rich. They had struck out at 2 previous homes before getting invited inside the home by Half Zantop.
Well, again, he probably only let them in because he's an educator. He was trying to help these kids out.
Well, and this deputy says, hey, Ranger, you need to sit down with investigators and tell them everything that you're telling me. As the story goes on, he tells them that Robert said that he deliberately selected a home with someone present because the purpose of the whole operation was robbery. They didn't want to just steal things. They wanted to rob someone, get their ATM cards, and get their PIN numbers from them, personal identification number from them, so they could use these ATM cards at will. But the other part of this that's even more sinister, again, this is according to a jailhouse snitch. Ranger tells the detectives that Robert told him, look, this was all kind of just an excuse for him. He wanted to kill somebody while he was out there doing this robbery.
I guess they had loose plans to, hey, let's get some money and then we'll go live a awesome, I think they said, badass life in Australia. So they were trying things like stealing people's mail and trying to steal cars and all this stuff. But like you're saying, you can go, well, we can break into houses. That'd be a great way to get money. Or we could rob somebody, even let's say gunpoint. Where this becomes very sinister is when somebody says, no, we'll just kill them.
Everything the captain just said is spot on. The thing here is it seemed like the 2 boys shared this idea that where they grew up, Chelsea, was boring and that they were destined for greater things.
Yeah, it's weird because they also seem like they didn't want to live a boring life, and they didn't like people that weren't trying to better themselves. But all these other opportunities, they talked about like joining the army or even the British forces, but they're like, but the training, that would be too difficult.
Yeah, that's why most people don't join the training.
But it just makes no sense because it seemed like they were anti people that weren't trying to make themselves better. And wouldn't by doing something hard, that's what makes you better. By going through a tough training, that's what makes you better.
Right. They weren't into drugs. They didn't do things like drugs or drink. In fact, the 2 of them even shunned away from fast food or any type of unhealthy food.
It's very strange.
And they did. They talked about living these badass lives. But unfortunately, it turned to things that were illegal activities like breaking and entering, burglary, joyriding, and boosted cars. And then, of course, these 2 murders. Now, no bail was granted to either teen due to the severity of the charges, thankfully. An investigative grand jury indicted both boys. The indictments revealed the evidence against the boys, and the prosecutor's theory of the crime. It appears that Robert and Jim were looking to collect about $10,000 roughly through different types of criminal activity to travel to and live in Australia. Working for the money, too slow, too mundane. So, as the captain pointed out, they stole from neighbors' mailboxes, looking for credit cards. They stole an ATV. They tried to sell it, but couldn't do it without the title. They kept running into problem after problem with their half-baked plan.
Well, they're also dumbasses.
Yeah. Yep. And this...
But that's where it becomes evil, though, because, again, it doesn't... look, maybe I'm a horrible person, but you get these two teenagers, they don't like the living situations, like you said, getting a job and saving the money. That's not fast enough. So you commit some crimes that really only affect somebody financially. Big whoop. They end up getting the money. They move to Australia. They live their badass life out. But once somebody decides that we need to murder somebody, that's when these two really become evil.
Yeah, and as said, there was a couple of other failed attempts. One attempt that we know about is something that took place in July of 2000 when the two teenagers went to and approached a home. The homeowner, they had actually cut the phone lines to this house.
Yeah.
The homeowner, for some reason, this is after 10 o'clock at night. It's dark out. He is living in Vermont, but this is Green Goose Road in Vermont. He previously had lived in New York, and maybe it was a little bit of the New Yorker inside of him that was like, you know what, I'm not opening up this door. So he talked to one of the teenagers. It's reported that it was Robert who had approached the door and had Jim hide outside. Robert approaches the door, and now the homeowner is talking to Robert through the door, and he's letting him know, look, I got a gun. I'm armed. If you guys attempt to come in here, or if you attempt to come in here, there will be shots fired. The story that Robert tried to sell to this guy through the door was that his vehicle had broken down and he needed to use a phone. And the homeowner's like, cool, there's a payphone right down the street within walking distance. Go ahead and go use that phone.
Well, then, like you said, the homeowner realizes somebody cut his phone line, so now he thinks something's up. And he stands guard basically all night waiting for this kid to try something.
Yep.
And on top of that, like, you want to talk about evil, you have Tolick that goes to the door, knock, 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 hey, I'm going to try to be the ruse, and waiting is Parker with a mask on, but they also dug shallow graves to put these individuals in.
Yeah, they had previously dug the grave to put whatever person was home. And that's what's crazy too. Like we can sit here and magnifying glass this as much as we can, as much as we can attempt to. Those conversations behind closed doors leading up, the plotting of these different adventures that they were going to go on, that's where a lot of the psychology comes into play, because you start to wonder, like, is one of these guys purposely steering the ship to saying, hey, you know what would be best is if we commit crimes where there is a victim present, rather than just breaking and entering and going through somebody's home. It's gets very difficult to say here.
But like I was saying earlier, the thing that law enforcement has on their side now is that we have two killers. They're kids. They're numbnuts. One of them is going to speak, and you can kind of threaten both of them. Hey, one of you is going to speak, and the first person to do it is going to get the best deal.
Yeah, so this comes about in December of 2001. The short of it here is that Robert and his attorneys were planning on an insanity defense for Robert. A big problem with that insanity defense is going to be that Jim, his partner in crime, was making a plea deal with the prosecution. Part of that deal is that Jim would tell the prosecution everything and would testify against Robert in exchange for reduced charges of being an accomplice to second-degree murder of the death of Susanne. His sentence would be 25 years to life, but he could apply for a reduced sentence after serving 16 years and 8 months. So in court in December, this is the 7th of December, Jim gives a 5-hour confession under questioning from the prosecutor. No details were spared in his complete account of all that had occurred. Jim confirmed that they selected the Zantops' home simply because it looked expensive. Jim said that after the murders and the failed escape to California, he started to see Robert in a different light. He said things that he hadn't liked about Robert stood out more and more to him now. And one of the things he was pointing out, he said that his friend Robert was rather violent toward his own dog, which Robert said that he hit the dog because he said the dog was stupid. This whole insanity defense was based around the idea that they say Robert was in full-blown manic episode when he killed Half Zantop. So Robert kills Half. Jim kills Susanne. Insanity defense. But the problem was in New Hampshire, there was no statutory standard for an insanity defense. Basically, it was up to the jury, right? There's no guidelines to decide if Robert or anyone had been insane at the time of a killing. And according to the book Judgment Ridge, the insanity defense had never been successful at any murder trial by a jury in the state of New Hampshire. Well, that's an uphill battle, my friend. So then Jim pled guilty, turned on Robert. Robert and his family and his attorneys then decided that there was too much evidence of premeditation to risk going for this insanity, right? You can't say, hey, I was in full-blown manic episode when I killed this man, and yet there's a mountain of evidence that you sat around plotting to kill somebody. You were planning this for weeks, for months. So they dropped the insanity plea, and Robert ended up pleading guilty. Robert was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole.
So Tolick is sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Parker is sentenced to 25 years with the possibility of parole.
25 to life with the possibility of parole. And then, of course, there were people that were rightfully angered by the plea agreement because it seemed that Jim got off easy with a mere accomplice charge, even though he had personally cut Suzanne's throat. But the prosecutor publicly reminded people that Jim was only 16 at the time of the murders, and he had demonstrated willingness to take responsibility for his actions, which was not on display by the other suspect. In her message to the media after the hearings, she simply said, "Justice has been served in this case." Now, Jim started off serving his sentence at the New Hampshire State Prison in Concord. His days were filled with things like schooling, guitar and piano lessons. Robert was sent to a smaller prison facility in Berlin, New Hampshire. Prison officials, they decided, look, the decision was made that Jim and Robert would never be together in the same facility, but Robert immediately became known as uncooperative and got into fights. Prison officials also learned of an attempted escape that he was planning. So he was sent to the state prison in Concord and assigned a maximum security cell in the secured housing unit until he was deemed eligible to be returned to Gen Pop. So for a while they were housed in the same facility.
Boot print evidence, the confessions, the murder weapons.
It's a lot. And look, that's a thorough job by detectives and by the New Hampshire State Police Department.
Well, and the sheriffs for catching them on the run. Shout
out to those boys in Indiana.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want to go too far down this road, but there was in 2012, so the U.S. Supreme Court made a ruling in Miller v. Alabama in 2012. After that ruling, 5 New Hampshire cases came under review based off of that ruling, off of that Supreme Court ruling. One of those included Robert Tolick's. As a result of that, in 2014, a superior court in New Hampshire ruled that this applied retroactively to Robert Tolick's case, along with some others, that it would be up for review for resentencing. The state appealed, but the New Hampshire State Court affirmed. So appeals by the defendants in the other cases held up as well. Robert is currently scheduled for a resentencing hearing sometime in 2024. In fact, it's originally scheduled for July, so that may have already happened. He may have already been resentenced. As for Jim, in the fall of 2018, his attorney petitioned the court for an early release. Remember, he would be eligible for an early release or reduced sentence after having served at least 16 years of that original sentence. The short of it, as much as nobody, or at least the Zantop daughters and the people that knew the Zantops, do not want these two individuals back out of prison, what we would end up having is Jim Parker has been paroled. In 2024, this year, Jim had served the requisite amount of his sentence to be considered for parole. Jim recently had a hearing in which the parole board members asked him questions about whether he was rehabilitated. Now, we know what Jim did. We know how horrible and heinous these crimes were. We know how horrific and brutal the act was. But we challenge you to watch the video of Jim's parole hearing and not pity him. He's nearly 40 years old. He's been in prison since he was 16. He comes across as remorseful, introspective, humble, and soft-spoken. This is from the NHPR. Quote, parole board member Ronald Bassett noted Jim had a stellar disciplinary record and has worked with nonprofit groups on art projects. Parker earned bachelor's and master's degrees. He's been a part of theatrical, musical, and sports activities and has helped develop inmate education guides. He has lived in transitional housing, which is usually the final placement for resident prior to their release. So all of these things are lining up in what the parole board would say. This is the way that you get granted parole. If you want a stepping stone to parole and eventually a release, do some of these things. Do all of these things. You know, in theory, the purpose of our prison system is to rehabilitate. I rarely think that happens, especially when we're talking about a double homicide case. In this case, I think it's been achieved. I mean, Jim seems to represent the best case scenario of the good our prison system can accomplish, true reform. So Jim Parker was released just this year.
Well, let's play a little clip from that parole hearing, and you could be the judge.
And we usually start these proceedings by asking the resident to tell us what they did.
Okay. In 2001, when I was 16, I entered the home of the Zantops pretending to be a student. And to have an interview, and during the interview, when Mr. Zantop pulled out his wallet, my co-defendant and I, he attacked Mr. Zantop, and then when his wife came in, I restrained her, and then when and then I cut her throat. She fell to the floor.
Why did you do that? It's so hard to, I've gone over it and just finding an explanation for that. It's just, I just don't know how I could do that. Well, let's put yourself back 2001.
Okay.
Was it 2001?
2001.
You were 16.
Yeah,
You were not alone.
that's correct. Robert Tulloch.
All right. And you two had tried to do this in other homes that day? And you were doing this, why? Going into homes.
We were attempting to get money to go overseas and live some sort of life of adventure or whatever, some sort of...
So were you planning on robbing people?
Yes, we were planning on obtaining their, yeah.
The violence, was that a part of your plan?
Yes,
You were going to kill somebody?
yes.
What do you think about what you did?
I think it's unimaginably horrible. And I mean, I know there's not an amount of time or things that I can do to change it or alleviate any pain that I've caused.
This one's tough for me because I do hear remorse in that clip, but because of his parole, I think it's likely that Tulloch will be paroled as well. Just who knows when.
Yeah, per the conditions established by the parole board, Jim Parker must not have any contact with anyone in the Zantop family and must continue to seek mental health treatment. As we said earlier, Robert remains in prison. The book Judgment Ridge, the true story behind the Dartmouth murders, really captures this case very well from start to finish. And a lot of the things that we just simply didn't have the time to cover here today. In its conclusion states, had Tulloch and Parker been apart, arguably this crime would never have occurred. In tandem, they brought out the worst in each other. The book depicts Robert as a near-perfect specimen of a true psychopath, but it does not absolve Jim, who went along with Robert's plan with no resistance. Arguably, the corruption of Jim is the second tragedy in this case, but let's not forget the first. The lives of Half and Susanne Zantop, snuffed out in 10 minutes' time by two teenagers looking for an adventure.
I want to thank everybody for joining us here in the garage. Thanks for telling a friend about the show. Thanks for telling your mama and papa about the show as well. Colonel, do we have any recommended reading for the beautiful listeners?
This week, we are very happy to be recommending Judgment Ridge, the true story behind the Dartmouth murders by Dick Lear and Mitchell Zuckoff. This is the definitive book about this case that really captured everyone in that area during this time. So if you want to learn more, our show, we dive deep into these cases, but this one goes super down into the depths of this intriguing true crime story. Check out Judgment Ridge, the true story behind the Dartmouth murders. You can find that recommendation and many more on our recommended page on our website, truecrimegarage.com.
And until next week, be good, be kind, and don't murder.
Have a question or need how-to advice? Just ask Meta AI. Whether you need to summarize your class notes or want to create a recipe with the ingredients you already have in your fridge, Meta AI has the answers. You can also research topics, explore interests, and so much more. It's the most advanced AI at your fingertips. Expand your world with Meta AI. Now on Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook, and Messenger.